Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one involves the structures, as you can see, of the nervous system, or perhaps more specifically of the nervous systems, because while there is sort of one global overarching nervous system, it is almost immediately broken up into two smaller nervous systems which are themselves subdivided. Luckily, I have a nice little diagram here that helps show all of these different parts. Now, the printing is probably kind of small if you're watching this on YouTube. You may want to try to maximize the screen. Then it'll probably be a little grainy, but it'll give you the general idea. The nervous system, what we call the nervous system, is subdivided into two component nervous systems, hence the plural on that first page. The first is called the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Now, the central nervous system is so named because it is both literally and figuratively central. Literally, if you think about it, your brain and your spinal cord are right down the center of the body, specifically the spinal cord. But even the brain is right there in the center. Okay? So it's literally running down the central area of our torsos, of our bodies, but it is also figuratively central. Because without the brain and spinal cord, the rest of the nervous system will have absolutely nothing to do. It is true that even with reflexes require the spinal cord. So without the brain and spinal cord, we will pretty much just kind of lay there like a bunch of cooked broccoli, as Dr. Frankenstein would say. There would be nothing that our bodies would do because it's the brain and spinal cord that give the orders and control pretty much everything in the body. Now, I'm going to talk a whole lot more about the brain and spinal cord later, or perhaps more specifically, you'll be able to get them from your book. I'll be talking about the brain much more later. Spinal cord is, I don't want to say it's easy or rudimentary, but it's a lot easier to understand than the brain is. So the brain I'll go into more detail later. But then we also have the peripheral nervous system. Now, if the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system is literally everything that isn't the brain and the spinal cord. So it's all the nerves and neurons and glia and everything that are in your arms and legs and trunk and face. And I mean, everything that isn't your brain and spinal cord. So it is peripheral, both literally and figuratively. Peripheral means to the side. And so if it's not central, it's over to the side, like your arms and legs and trunk. It's to the side. But it's also peripheral in that technically it is not central to functioning. If the peripheral nervous system doesn't have a brain or spinal cord, it can't do anything. But the central nervous system can do quite well, you know what I mean, without the peripheral nervous system. It can still function without it. Now, the peripheral nervous system itself is subdivided into two parts. The first is called let's go with the somatic. The first is called the somatic nervous system. Now, soma is another word for body. And the somatic nervous system essentially is involved in carrying sensory information and also in voluntary movement. Okay? Perhaps also in reflexes, but particularly in voluntary movement. So the movement that you may be making right now to look at the screen or look away from the screen or to write something down or to, text on your phone, whatever it is you're doing right now, hopefully you're paying attention, that's all controlled by the somatic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system, look at the word autonomic. It kind of looks like the word automatic, doesn't it? That's a good way to remember it, because the autonomic nervous system controls behaviors, movements, things that we are not in control of, that function automatically. Your heartbeat, your blood pressure, the size of the pupils of your eyes, your digestive system. I mean, all of those things that without a whole lot of practice we have no control over are part of the autonomic nervous system. For instance, if you've ever been embarrassed and you blush, or you've ever been nervous and you sweat, those are things that we don't have control over. We would like to, God knows, we would like to be able to have control, certainly I would, over blushing and sweating and everything else, emotional feelings that we have. But unfortunately, we don't. And that's because emotions are also controlled by the autonomic nervous system. More about that later. Now, the autonomic nervous system itself can be subdivided into two divisions, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. Again, starting with the one on the right, the sympathetic division. Now, if you've ever heard of something called the fight or flight response, that's the sympathetic division. The fight or flight response occurs when we are threatened in some way, whether it's a physical threat or a psychological threat. And by the way, you'll hear a lot more about this when we talk about emotion and when we talk about stress. But there's some kind of threat. And what happens is our body reacts. It prepares for that threat. Okay? It's going to deal with it somehow. And traditionally, our species has dealt with threats by doing one of two things. Most species do. You're either going to fight or you're going to run. And so the sympathetic division gets you ready to do both of those things. So if you're nervous, for whatever reason, because there is a threat, whether it's physical or psychological, our bodies unfortunately don't distinguish well between the two. But there is a threat, what happens? If someone asks you to get up in front of a group and speak and you didn't know you were going to have to do that, what happens? Your heart starts pounding, you start sweating, your mouth goes dry, your stomach ties in knots. All of those things are controlled by the sympathetic division. What are they doing? They're preparing you to either fight or run. The sweating, the trembling, warming up the muscles, the dry mouth, the digestive tract all in knots. Well, you don't need to digest things if you're either going to have to run or fight. Okay, you can digest it later. So it puts all that stuff on hold. Okay, the face flushing is with the blood pressure to get you ready to go. I mean, all of these things are part of your body's way to keep you safe. It's why it's called the sympathetic division, or at least this is how I remember it. If you're under threat, the sympathetic division has sympathy for you. It feels sorry for you. It wants to help you get away. So it revs you up so you can escape that threat, whatever it is. Sympathetic division revs you up. Now, anyone who's been under a lot of stress for a long period of time knows that you cannot live revved up forever, or you're going to crash. Again, a lot more about that in the stress section. But in the same way that we have something that revs us up, we really need something that slows us down. And what slows us down is the parasympathetic division. The parasympathetic division helps us conserve energy, it helps us run at the normal even keel that we have, and it brings us down from those heights of stress. The way I remember this is, parasympathetic looks a little bit like parachute. What does a parachute do if you use it properly? It slows you down. And the parasympathetic division slows you down. Okay? Conserves the energy. You know, no one can run at 100 miles an hour forever. You gotta slow down and relax at some point. The parasympathetic does that. But on the other hand, if you're under a threat, conserving energy is not going to do you any good. So the sympathetic kicks in and revs you up so you can escape. It's a fine balance. All of these are balances. Okay? So quick recap. Nervous system. Subdivided into the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, which is the somatic nervous system, which is involved in sensation and voluntary movement, and the autonomic nervous system, which is involved in automatic things like digestion and pupils and blood pressure and stuff. Now, the autonomic nervous system, of course, is also subdivided into the sympathetic division that revs us up when there's a threat, and the parasympathetic division that slows us down when there isn't.